that had watched humanity for nearly 200 years before they decided to make contact. During those long decades of observation, their scientists and analysts collected data on every aspect of human civilization. They studied human wars and human peace. They documented human cruelty and human innovation. They recorded the rise and fall of nations, the birth of new technologies, and the slow expansion of humanity into the stars. But nothing they observed confused them more than human kindness. Commander Daniel Warren stood on the observation deck of the Starship Meridian, watching the alien vessel approach through the vast darkness of space. Beside him, Dr. Lisa Monroe held a translation device in her trembling hands. Neither of them had slept properly in days. The weight of this moment pressed down on them like a physical force. First contact with an alien species, the dream of countless generations, finally becoming reality. The ship was beautiful in a way that human vessels were not. It seemed almost organic, its crystalline hull catching the distant starlight and scattering it into rainbow patterns. The ship moved with a grace that suggested it was grown rather than built. Lisa checked her translation device for the 100th time. The preliminary linguistic data that had transmitted seemed accurate, but she could not shake the fear of misunderstanding. One wrong word could change everything. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was steady, reassuring. "We have prepared for this," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The docking procedure took nearly an hour. Human engineers worked alongside protocols they had only theorized about, adapting their systems to accommodate the alien vessel. When the airlock finally opened, Daniel felt his heart stop. They were tall, nearly 8 feet in height, and their bodies appeared to be made of living crystal. Light pulsed beneath their translucent skin, flowing in patterns that seemed almost like language. They moved with a fluid elegance that made human motion seem clumsy by comparison. The leader of the delegation stepped forward. Its crystalline form hummed with a soft, musical tone that filled the corridor. "I am Crystalline Voice of Morning," the being said. The translation device rendered its words in a calm, neutral voice. "I speak for the Galactic Confederacy." Daniel bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that humans had agreed upon during their preparations. "I am Commander Daniel Warren. This is Dr. Lisa Monroe. We welcome you to our vessel and to humanity." The alien studied them for a long moment. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were deep pools of shifting light. "We have observed your species for many of your generations," Crystalline Voice of Morning said. "We have studied 1,400 sentient species across this galaxy. We have documented their histories, their cultures, their methods of survival and expansion." Daniel nodded, unsure where this was leading. "Your species confuses us, Commander Warren." Lisa exchanged a glance with Daniel. This was not the opening they had expected. "In what way?" Daniel asked carefully. The ambassador gestured with one of its long, crystalline limbs. The movement created a trail of light that hung in the air for a moment before fading. "We observed your kind rushing into burning structures to save strangers. We documented your medical practitioners traveling to regions of poverty and disease, working without compensation, sleeping in primitive conditions, simply to heal those who could never repay them." The ambassador paused, its internal light pulsing with what might have been confusion. "We recorded humans adopting orphaned children from distant nations, raising them as their own offspring without hesitation or expectation of return. We witnessed humans building shelters for those without homes, feeding those without food, clothing those without protection from the elements." Daniel remained silent, unsure how to respond. These were not accusations. They seemed to be genuine questions. "In our study of sentient life," the ambassador continued, "we have observed compassion. We have seen species care for their own kind, for their genetic relatives, for those who share their tribal or national identity. This is logical. This serves the propagation of genetic material and the stability of social structures. The moved closer. Its crystalline body radiated a gentle warmth. But your species extends this compassion to strangers, to other species, to beings who cannot benefit you in any measurable way. You sacrifice your own resources, your own safety, your own comfort, for those who will never repay the debt. The ambassador's voice carried something that sounded almost like wonder. Why do you do this? Daniel thought carefully before responding. He looked at Lisa, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to speak from his heart. Because they need help, he said simply, and we can give it. The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Its internal light flickered in complex patterns. There is no strategic advantage to such behavior. There is no genetic benefit. There is no logical framework that explains this pattern of resource allocation. Lisa stepped forward, her initial nervousness fading as she found her voice. That is not why we do it, she said gently. We do it because suffering is wrong, because loneliness is painful, because every life has value, even when that life cannot benefit our own. She paused, searching for the right words. We call it compassion, or kindness, or love. We have many words for it because it is central to who we are. Not all humans live by these principles, and we often fail to meet our own standards. But the ideal remains, the belief that we should help those who need help simply because they need it. The delegation stood in silence. Daniel could sense their confusion, their struggle to process information that did not fit their models of sentient behavior. Finally, the ambassador spoke again. We came here expecting to find warriors. Your species has a long history of violence. Your wars are well documented. We prepared ourselves for hostility, for aggression, for the territorial behavior we have observed in countless other species. The crystalline being extended a tendril toward Daniel. It was a gesture of greeting, of peace, of something that might have been the beginning of friendship. Instead, we find this, a species capable of terrible destruction, yet choosing kindness, a species with the power to conquer, yet building shelters for the weak. Daniel reached out and allowed the tendril to touch his hand. The contact was warm, gentle, almost electric. We are many things, Daniel said quietly. We are capable of great cruelty and great kindness. What we become depends on the choices we make. What they did not understand, what no species in the galaxy had yet learned, was that humanity's capacity for boundless love contained within it a shadow, a darkness that slept quietly beneath their gentle exterior, a fury that could reshape stars and end civilizations. The galaxy would learn this lesson in time, but for now, in this moment of first contact, there was only wonder, only hope, only the beginning of a relationship that would change everything. And somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, something watched, something calculated, something hungry waited for its opportunity to test the limits of human kindness. That test would come, and when it did, the galaxy would learn what humanity truly was. 3 years passed after first contact, and humanity became something the galaxy had never seen before. They became the healers, the helpers, the ones who asked for nothing in return. Their reputation spread from system to system, from species to species, until the name of Earth was spoken with something close to reverence. Human medical ships traveled to worlds ravaged by plague and disease. Their doctors and nurses worked themselves to exhaustion, sleeping in shifts, pushing their bodies beyond reasonable limits, all to save lives that were not their own. They asked no payment. They demanded no treaties. They simply arrived when called and did what needed to be done. Human engineers rebuilt infrastructure on planets torn apart by war. They repaired power stations and water treatment facilities. They constructed schools and hospitals on worlds where such things had been destroyed generations ago. When local populations asked what humanity wanted in exchange, the engineers simply smiled, and said they wanted nothing but peace. On the forest moon of 7, a small human settlement had been established as a refuge for displaced species. The moon was beautiful, covered in vast forests of purple and blue vegetation, with crystal-clear rivers cutting through valleys of soft grass. Commander Brooks had been assigned to oversee operations there, coordinating supply drops and construction efforts. Maria Santos served as the settlement's chief administrator. She was a small woman with dark hair and kind eyes, the daughter of immigrants who had taught her that helping others was the highest calling a person could pursue. She had left a comfortable life on Earth to come to this distant moon, to do the work she believed mattered most. On this particular morning, she walked through the rows of temporary housing, checking on the arrivals. The settlement had grown quickly over the past months. Refugees from a dozen different species now called 7 home, at least temporarily. They came from worlds destroyed by war, by natural disaster, by the cruelty of those more powerful than themselves. Near the edge of the housing area, Maria spotted a family of huddled together beside a heating unit. There were small beings, about the size of human children, covered in soft brown fur. Their eyes were enormous and dark, adapted for the low light of their forest. This family consisted of a mother and 3 children, the youngest barely old enough to walk on its own. Maria approached slowly, not wanting to frighten them. She had learned that many refugees were terrified of beings larger than themselves. They had learned through bitter experience that size and power usually meant danger. She knelt beside the youngest child, bringing herself down to their level. "Are you hungry?" she asked softly. The mother flinched and pulled her children closer to her body. Her large eyes were filled with fear, with the memory of things Maria could only imagine. They had fled the Dominion Wars, a brutal conflict that had reduced them to ash and scattered their people across the galaxy. Maria understood the fear. She did not take offense at it. From her bag, she produced a ration pack specifically designed for biology. Human scientists had worked hard to ensure that the food they provided was suitable for each species under their care. She opened the pack carefully and placed it within reach of the family. "It is safe," she said. "You are safe here. No one will hurt you, I promise." The mother studied Maria's face for a long moment. Her enormous eyes searched for deception, for the hidden cruelty that surely must exist beneath such kindness. In her experience, powerful beings did not kneel before the weak. They did not offer food without expecting something in return. But she found no cruelty in Maria's eyes, only warmth, only genuine concern. Slowly, trembling slightly, the mother reached out and took the food. She divided it among her children before taking any for herself, making sure they ate first. It was the act of a parent who had gone hungry many times so that her offspring might survive. Maria sat with them while they ate. She did not speak. She did not demand gratitude. She simply stayed nearby, a calm presence in a world that had shown this family nothing but violence. Across the settlement, similar scenes unfolded every day. Human volunteers cradled orphaned alien children who had no one left in the universe. They sang lullabies to traumatized refugees who could not understand the words but recognized the gentle tone. They sat with the elderly and the dying, holding strange hands and unfamiliar appendages, simply so no being would have to face their final moments alone. Brooks watched these interactions from his command post. He had served in the military for 20 years before taking this assignment. He had seen combat. He had known violence, but nothing in his career had prepared him for the quiet heroism he witnessed every day on 7. His communications officer approached with a data tablet. "Commander, we have received another transport request. A group of refugees from the outer systems. Approximately 200 individuals, mostly families with children." Nodded. "Prepare additional housing units. Coordinate with Dr. Santos on medical screening protocols. Make sure we have appropriate food supplies ready." "Yes, sir," the officer hesitated. "Sir, we are approaching capacity. The settlement was designed for 5,000 individuals. We now have nearly 12,000. Looked out the window at the sprawling camp below. He knew the officer was right. Resources were stretched thin. Personnel were exhausted. Every day brought new challenges. "We will make room," he said quietly. "We always make room." Word of 7 spread through the galaxy. Earth became synonymous with sanctuary. Humanity became synonymous with hope. Species that had never known kindness from strangers learned that such kindness existed. Children who had grown up in war zones learned that not all powerful beings brought pain. But in the dark spaces between stars, something watched these developments with cold interest. The hegemony had conquered 14 systems through brutality and fear. They ruled through terror, crushing any resistance with overwhelming force. They viewed compassion as a weakness to be exploited, kindness as a defect that made species vulnerable. Their scouts had observed the human settlement on 7. They had counted the refugees, noted the lack of significant military defenses, calculated the strategic value of striking such a target. In the war councils of the voices debated the wisdom of attacking a human installation. Some argued caution. The humans possessed technology that rivaled their own. Their military, though smaller, was not to be underestimated. But others laughed at such concerns. The humans were helpers, they said. They were healers. They built shelters and fed the hungry. Such beings could never pose a serious threat. Their compassion made them weak. Their kindness made them prey. Commander, the most decorated military leader in history, listened to these debates in silence. When the arguments had finished, he rose from his seat and addressed the council. "The humans have shown us their nature," he said. "They protect the weak. They shelter the vulnerable. They pour their resources into beings who cannot defend themselves." He smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Let us show them what such weakness costs. Let us burn their precious sanctuary. Let us teach the galaxy what happens to those who mistake mercy for strength." The council voted unanimously in favor of the attack. In the refugee camps of 7, Maria Santos tucked a child into bed and sang it a soft lullaby. She had no way of knowing that in 3 days, warships would descend from the sky. She had no way of knowing that her kindness was about to cost her everything. But she would have done it anyway, because that was who she was. That was who humanity was. And they were about to learn what a terrible mistake they had made. The attack came without warning on a quiet morning, when the forest moon of 7 was bathed in golden light. Maria Santos was in the food distribution center when the first explosions shook the ground. She had been counting ration supplies, making lists of what needed to be requested from Earth on the next transport. The sound was like nothing she had ever heard before, a deep roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She ran outside and looked up at the sky. Warships hung in the atmosphere like dark mountains. There were dozens of them, their massive hulls blocking out the sunlight. Weapons platforms along their undersides glowed with building energy. Then the bombardment began. Plasma strikes fell from the sky like rain. The refugee housing units, built from lightweight materials designed for comfort rather than protection, disintegrated instantly. Families who had been eating breakfast vanished in flashes of superheated light. Children who had been playing in the morning sun ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. Maria did not freeze. Her body moved before her mind could process what was happening. She sprinted toward the nearest shelter bunker, shouting for others to follow. Along the way, she grabbed anyone she could reach, pulling confused refugees along with her. A group of children stood crying in the street, paralyzed by terror. Their enormous eyes reflected the fire falling from the sky. Maria scooped up 2 of them and pushed the third ahead of her, forcing them to run. The bunker entrance was just ahead. She could see other humans directing refugees inside, their voices calm despite the chaos around them. Brooke stood at the doorway, waving people through, counting heads, refusing to go inside until everyone possible had been saved. A plasma strike hit the ground 30 meters away. The shockwave knocked Maria off her feet. She curled her body around the children, shielding them with her own flesh. When she looked up, she saw another strike incoming. It was heading directly for them. There was no time to run, no time to do anything but act. She threw the children toward the bunker entrance with all her strength, caught them as they tumbled through the doorway. The plasma strike consumed Maria Santos before she could take another breath. Saw it happen. He saw the flash of light, the brief silhouette of a woman who had given everything to protect those who could not protect themselves. Then she was gone, and where she had stood there was only scorched earth. He screamed her name, but there was nothing he could do. More strikes were falling. More refugees needed to reach the bunker. He forced himself to keep working, to keep saving who he could, even as tears streamed down his face. The bombardment lasted for 2 hours. When they finally stopped firing, they sent ground forces to sweep through the ruins. Soldiers in heavy armor marched through the burning camps, their weapons cutting down anyone who had survived the initial attack. In the underground bunkers gathered the survivors. There were fewer than 800 beings huddled in the darkness, out of the 12,000 who had called the settlement home that morning. Humans and aliens alike sat in shocked silence, their faces illuminated only by emergency lighting. Sealed the blast doors and activated the distress beacon. Then he sat down against the cold metal wall and wept. Above ground, Commander surveyed his victory. The human settlement was nothing but smoking craters and scattered debris. Bodies lay everywhere, most of them too badly burned to identify. The soldiers moved through the ruins, looking for survivors to finish off. Activated his communications system and broadcast a message across all frequencies. "The humans are weak," he announced. "Their compassion makes them prey. Let this be a lesson to all who would shelter beneath their protection. The hegemony does not negotiate. We do not show mercy. We consume." The message was received across the galaxy. Species that had come to trust humanity heard the words with horror. The ambassador wept crystalline tears when the report reached them. In refugee camps across a dozen worlds, beings who had been saved by human kindness huddled together in fear. On Earth, the message arrived during a session of the United Nations. Representatives from 193 nations watched the footage in silence. They saw the burning shelters. They saw the bodies of refugees that humanity had promised to protect. They saw the small, broken forms of children who had trusted human hands to keep them safe. The chamber was silent. No one knew what to say. Admiral Christopher Lane stood at the podium. He was 63 years old, a veteran of 3 colonial conflicts, a man who had spent his entire career arguing for diplomatic solutions and peaceful resolution of disputes. His hair was gray, his face lined with decades of responsibility. He looked at the screen showing Maria Santos. Her personnel file photo smiled back at him, full of life and hope and the belief that kindness could change the galaxy. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. "We offered the galaxy our kindness," he said. "We asked for nothing in return. We built shelters for the homeless. We healed the sick. We fed the hungry. We took in the orphaned children of species we had never met and raised them as our own." He paused. His hands did not tremble. His eyes did not waver. "And they burned it all. They murdered the innocent. They slaughtered children who had done nothing wrong except trust us to keep them safe." He looked at the representatives gathered before him. Men and women from every nation on Earth, every culture, every background. They were divided by language and history and politics. But in this moment, they were united by something far more powerful than their differences. "They believe compassion is weakness," Lane continued. "They believe our love makes us prey. They believe that because we choose to help instead of harm, we are incapable of harm." He straightened his shoulders. They are wrong. A murmur passed through the chamber. People shifted in their seats. Something was changing in the air, something ancient and terrible and human. I am requesting full authorization of military force, Lane said. I am requesting the activation of all reserve fleets. I am requesting the mobilization of every soldier, every ship, every weapon in human space. He looked directly at the camera, knowing his words would be transmitted to every corner of human civilization. They wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about weakness. We are going to teach them a different lesson. We are going to teach them what happens when humanity stops being kind. The vote was unanimous, not a single voice opposed. Within hours, shipyards across human space began their transformation. Facilities that had produced medical vessels and cargo transports retooled their production lines for weapons of war. Reserve fleets that had gathered dust for decades were activated and crewed. And across every human world, men and women who had spent their lives healing and helping prepared themselves for something different. For the first time in generations, humanity remembered what it truly was. And the galaxy was about to learn. The human response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Within 72 hours of the Seven Massacre, the entire military infrastructure of humanity mobilized. Reserve fleets that had been mothballed for decades were activated and crewed. Shipyards that had spent years producing medical vessels and cargo haulers began constructing weapons of terrible power. Soldiers who had retired to quiet lives received their notices and reported for duty without complaint. Admiral Christopher Lane assembled the largest armada in human history. 400 warships formed the core of the fleet, supported by 12 carrier groups carrying thousands of strike craft. 2 million soldiers prepared for ground operations. The logistics alone would have been impossible for most species to coordinate. But humanity had learned long ago how to organize for war. The fleet gathered in the outer reaches of human space, visible from observation stations throughout the sector. Other species watched in amazement as the ships assembled. Many of these races had dealt with humanity for years, receiving their medical aid and accepting their charity. They had come to think of humans as gentle beings, helpers and healers incapable of violence. Now they watched the same species prepare for war, and they understood how badly they had misunderstood. Daniel Warren, now captain of the dreadnought Judgment, stood on his bridge as the fleet prepared to depart. He was older than he had been during first contact, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes still held the same quiet intensity they had always possessed. A communication request came through from he accepted it. Crystalline voice of morning appeared on the screen. The ambassador's crystalline form pulsed with agitated light. Captain Warren, they said, we understand your grief. The Confederacy shares your sorrow at the tragedy of 7, but surely there can be negotiation. Surely diplomacy can address this situation without further bloodshed. Daniel looked at the screen in silence for a long moment. There will be no negotiation, he said finally. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. They killed children, Ambassador, children who trusted us, children we swore to protect. The Confederacy can mediate. We can establish a framework for peace talks. We can. The Confederacy watched 14 systems fall to thee and did nothing. Daniel's eyes were hollow, exhausted, ancient with a grief that went beyond words. You observed their conquests from a safe distance. You documented their atrocities and filed reports about them. You did nothing to stop them. He leaned forward slightly. We will not make the same mistake. The transmission ended. The human fleet departed 3 days later. They traveled in formation through the darkness between stars, their engines burning bright against the void. Other ships moved aside as they passed. No one wanted to be in their way. The first battle took place at the edge of space, where a defensive fleet had been assembled to stop the human advance. The commanders were confident. They had fought many wars. They had never lost. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Human weapons were not designed for efficiency. They were designed for devastation. Ships that had been built by a species that had decided mercy was no longer an option tore through the defenders like fire through paper. The precision of the attack was terrifying. Every shot found its target. Every maneuver was perfect. When it was over, the defensive fleet was nothing but expanding clouds of debris. Commander received the report in his war room. He stared at the tactical display in disbelief. "Impossible," he breathed. "They are healers, they are helpers. They build shelters and feed the hungry. They cannot fight like this." His tactical officer was pale with fear. "They were healers," the officer whispered, "before we reminded them what they used to be." The human advance continued. Planet after planet fell. Military installations were destroyed with surgical precision. Defense stations that had held off enemy fleets for generations were reduced to rubble in hours. But here, the galaxy witnessed something unexpected, something that confused them as deeply as humanity's original kindness had confused them. On conquered worlds, human soldiers did not slaughter civilians. They established humanitarian zones. They separated combatants from innocents with careful precision. They arrested military leaders but left ordinary citizens unharmed. Dr. Price was a field medic attached to the invasion force. She had been a pediatric surgeon on Earth before the war began, specializing in treating children with rare diseases. When the call came for medical personnel to support the military campaign, she had volunteered immediately. Now she knelt beside a wounded child in the ruins of a conquered city. The child's parent had died fighting against the human advance. The child was alone, terrified, bleeding from shrapnel wounds. Cleaned the wounds with practiced efficiency. She applied bandages and administered pain medication. She offered water from her own canteen. The child looked up at her with eyes that could not understand what was happening. "Why?" the child rasped. "Why do you help me? My parent tried to kill you." Paused in her work. She looked at the small being before her, at the fear and confusion in its eyes. "Because you did not burn our shelters," she said softly. "Your soldiers did. Your leaders did, but you are just a child. You did not choose this war, and we do not make war on children." Around them, other human medics were treating other wounded. Soldiers distributed food and water to the civilian population. Engineers began repairing critical infrastructure that had been damaged in the fighting. The civilians watched in disbelief. These were the monsters who had destroyed their military. These gentle beings who healed their wounded and fed their hungry. The galaxy began to understand something important. Humanity's kindness was not weakness. It was control. It was a conscious choice, made every day, to extend compassion where compassion was deserved. The humans had the capacity for terrible violence. Their weapons and tactics had proven that beyond any doubt. But they chose not to use that violence against those who did not deserve it. The ambassador discussed this with their council in hushed tones. "They separate their fury from their compassion," the ambassador said. "They direct their wrath only at those who have earned it. The rest they protect." "How is this possible?" another council member asked. "How can a species capable of such destruction remain capable of such mercy?" The ambassador had no answer. On the front lines, Daniel Warren received reports of the humanitarian operations his forces were conducting. He read each one carefully, approving requests for additional medical supplies and food shipments. Brooks had survived the massacre on 7. He now served aboard the Judgment as Daniel's second-in-command. He stood beside his captain, watching the same reports. "Some of the crew do not understand," said quietly. "They ask why we help the enemy's civilians. They ask why we show mercy to the families of those who showed us none." Daniel was silent for a moment. Because if we become what they are, they win, he said finally. They wanted to prove that kindness is weakness. They wanted to prove that compassion leads to destruction. If we abandon our principles in our pursuit of justice, we prove them right. He looked out at the stars. We will make them answer for what they did. Their military will be destroyed. Their leaders will face justice. But their children will grow up knowing that humans protected them when they had every reason to hate them. Nodded slowly. He thought of Maria, of her sacrifice, of the children she had saved. She would have wanted it this way, he said. Yes, Daniel agreed, she would have. The advance continued. The final battle was approaching, and humanity would teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The final battle took place above the Commander had gathered every remaining ship his species possessed. Hundreds of warships formed a defensive sphere around the planet. Orbital defense stations bristled with weapons. Ground-based artillery pointed at the sky. Tens of millions of soldiers waited in fortified positions across the surface. It was the most formidable defensive arrangement in history. Their ancestors had built these defenses over centuries, preparing for any threat the galaxy might send against them. None of it would be enough. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel and immediately began their assault. Admiral Christopher Lane stood on the bridge of the flagship Resolution, watching the tactical display as his forces engaged the enemy. The battle was brutal but brief. Human weapons technology had been advancing quietly for generations while they focused on peaceful endeavors. Now that technology was unleashed with devastating effect. Warships that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were torn apart by weapons they could barely comprehend. The orbital defense stations fell one by one. The ground-based artillery was silenced by precision strikes from space. Within hours, the military was effectively destroyed. Watch from his command bunker as his fleet was reduced to debris. The tactical displays showed nothing but human ships now, surrounding his world like a noose. Order the surface batteries to continue firing, he commanded. Sir, there is nothing left to fire, his aide replied. Our weapons are destroyed, our ships are gone, we have nothing. Stared at the screens showing the human fleet. 400 warships hung in orbit above his world. Any one of them could glass the surface of his planet. Together, they could end his species in a single afternoon. He waited for the bombardment to begin. He waited for the vengeance he knew was coming. But the weapons did not fire. Instead, Admiral Lane opened a communication channel to the planet below. His face appeared on screens across in military bunkers and civilian homes, in city squares and rural villages. People of the hegemony, he said, your military is broken, your fleet is destroyed, your weapons are silent, we could glass your world from orbit, we could end your species in a single afternoon. He paused. The bridge crew watched him in silence. We will not. Across the billions of beings listened in stunned confusion. This was not how war worked. This was not what victors did. What your leaders did was unforgivable, Lane continued. They murdered innocents. They burned sanctuaries. They slaughtered children who had done nothing wrong except trust us to protect them. His voice hardened for a moment, carrying the weight of grief that had become a constant companion. For those crimes, your military leaders will face justice. They will answer for what they have done. There will be accountability for 7. Then his voice softened again. But you are not your leaders. Your children are not your soldiers. Your civilians did not vote for the massacre of refugees. And we, despite everything, are still human. He looked at the planet below, at the cities filled with terrified families, at the children huddled in shelters waiting for annihilation. This is the lesson we want you to learn. Not that we are powerful, not that we are dangerous. You already know those things. Your shattered fleet tells you everything you need to know about human military capability. He took a breath. The lesson is this: even after everything you took from us, we are choosing mercy, not because we are weak, not because we cannot destroy you, but because kindness is who we are. It is what we choose to be, and no amount of cruelty will ever take that from us. The transmission ended. Human ground forces landed on the over the following days. They came not as conquerors but as peacekeepers. They arrested military leaders responsible for ordering the Seven Massacre. They established tribunals to ensure fair trials. They began the long process of helping the civilian population rebuild. Price was among the first medics on the surface. She set up a field hospital in a damaged city, treating wounded without regard for which side they had fought on. Other doctors joined her, creating a network of medical care that spread across the planet. "I do not understand," an elder told her one day. "We killed your people, we burned your sanctuary, why do you heal us?" Paused in her work, she thought about the question carefully. "Because your leaders made a choice to be cruel," she said finally, "and we are making a choice to be kind. Their choice does not define who we have to be. Our choices define who we are." The elder was silent for a long moment. "Your species is strange," it said finally, "and wonderful and terrifying." Smiled slightly. "Yes, we are all of those things." 6 months later, the ambassador visited Earth. Crystalline Voice of Morning walked through the memorial garden that had been built for the victims of Seven. Flowers bloomed in careful arrangements around a wall of stone. Thousands of names were carved into that wall, human and alien alike. Daniel Warren walked beside the ambassador. He was grayer now, aged by the war in ways that went beyond years. "We were wrong about you," the ambassador admitted. "We thought your kindness and your fury were separate things, two different aspects of your nature, unrelated to each other." Daniel shook his head slowly. "They are the same thing," he said quietly. "We are kind because we love. We fight because we protect what we love. The love creates the kindness. The love also creates the fury when that kindness is betrayed." He stopped before a particular section of the wall. Maria Santos' name was carved there, along with a small photograph surrounded by flowers. Some of those flowers had been left by refugees she had saved with her final act. "Hurt us and we will heal," Daniel said. "Threaten us and we will defend. But harm the innocent. Harm the children we have sworn to protect." He met the ambassador's gaze. "Then you will learn why the galaxy should pray that humanity never stops being kind. Because our kindness is the only thing standing between the universe and what we become when that kindness ends." The ambassador was silent for a long moment. "And what is that?" they finally asked. Daniel did not answer in words. He simply turned back to the memorial, to the names of the dead, to the quiet grief of a species that had learned to love so deeply that its fury had become something cosmic. In the centuries that followed, the Seven Massacre became a turning point in galactic history. Humanity continued to build shelters and heal the sick. They continued to feed the hungry and comfort the lonely. Their kindness remained boundless, offered freely to any species in need. But every civilization in the Confederacy taught the same lesson to their children: be grateful for human compassion, respect it, honor it, never betray it. Because humanity's kindness is timeless, and their fury is apocalyptic.